angels, terrifying wild-looking monsters, or cute, chubby babies? Find out today on Spirit Spire with Father John Baptist Hoang, starting right now. Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Spire. And now, here is your host. Hello and welcome to another episode of Spirit Spire. I'm Isaac Fox, your host for today, joined as usual with my wonderful co-hosts and dear friends, Mr. John Soul.
Good day, everyone.
And Mr. Vince Ricketts.
Hello.
It's great to be with you all today. And anybody watching, you'll notice that we also have a guest in the studio today, very special guest. Father John Baptist Hoang is a Dominican priest. He is also established here locally as the chaplain for U of L here in Louisville, and is one of the priests at St. Louis Bertrand over on 6th Street. Father, it's a real honor to have you with us today. Thanks for taking the time to come on Spirit Inspire.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, we have a couple of questions I know we would love to ask you today on a very particular topic, which we think people will find interesting. But before we get into that, one of the things we always love on this show is to hear a little bit about vocation stories. We think that's really important. And maybe you could just give us kind of a brief sketch of your background, your life, and what led you into vocation of becoming a priest in general, but perhaps a Dominican in particular.
Absolutely, yeah. So both my parents are from Vietnam, and they both came to the U.S. I was born in the U.S. I was born in California. My dad was in the Navy, and we ended up settling in Virginia. That's where I just grew up for most of my life. Did my schooling there. Went to school at the University of Virginia. At the University of Virginia, that's where the Dominicans run the chaplaincy for the campus ministry. I grew up kind of Catholic, but maybe just going through the motions. Faith, religion wasn't really that strong in my family. You know, we would go to Sunday masses, and I would learn the faith, just through the parish there. But I got confirmed at 13 years old, and my high school years was just pretty much just being just a high school student, just a typical teenager. And it wasn't until I got to college, was first time being away from home, and that's when I started taking faith a little bit more seriously. Just some circumstances led in that direction, typically just asking the big questions, but invitations just from people, like people down my dorm hallway, just bring me to church at least. So just dipping my toes back into church in that way. And then halfway through college was when I made my first confession, 5 years at that time. So very, very powerful moment there. Yeah, but pretty much what drew me right away to just the Dominican order was the preaching. I never heard preaching like the Dominicans before. I grew up in a solid diocese of diocesan priests, the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia. So there's no complaints there. That diocese is just an incredible diocese. The priest there is just incredible, but maybe just given the circumstances, I wasn't searching for God and happened to be searching for God during my college years. But the preaching of the Dominicans just blew me away. I remember my first Sunday Mass there in college, and I couldn't stop thinking about the priest's homilies, so much so that I just kept thinking about the priest's homilies throughout the whole week. And sometimes I would zone out in my classes. I started off in studying chemical engineering. Okay. And I just zoned out of my engineering classes and just kept thinking about the homily. It's just so incredible. But basically, my second year, I just decided to take an elective class as I started to dive deeper into my faith. And this elective class offered in the religious studies department at UVA. It was just called Early Christian Thought, and one of the things we read was St. Augustine's Confessions. And I remember so being in chemical engineering, you take organic chemistry. Organic chemistry is really tough, but I don't know, maybe God's providence. But instead of paying attention to organic chemistry, I was just in the back of the class reading St. Augustine's Confession and just being wrapped in it there. So maybe the intellectual life and theology just really sparked my interest.
So how'd your grade shake out in that class?
Well, then I did a complete 180 of my major. I was like, I'm done with engineering. And so I ended up doing a double major in religious studies and sociology.
Wow.
So yeah, I chose those two majors because one is like religious studies, I like God, and I concentrated on Christianity and Judaism as kind of like my concentration there.
Yeah, very cool.
But then sociology is like, I also like people. So I like God, I like people, so, and the sociology department at that time was really solid. Took a great class by a Catholic professor there.
I kind of love that because, in college is when the young people are being most formed, right? And you're most searching, open. You have the energy to even care about some of these bigger questions. And of course, you have all kinds of people giving you answers. And it's a critical time in your life. So for you to, hear the voice of God and connect on that kind of deep level as you're seeking truth, to where you change your whole major just for that sake is pretty phenomenal, pretty unique. So I think it would speak to the heart of many young people in that same age, searching and hoping for that kind of connection.
Yeah, it was definitely just rocked. Complete 180 of my life too, because even before, it's just like everything was in tandem. Like my first 2 years in college was pretty much, I was just more ambitious and I put my happiness in just kind of like money and things and pleasures. And once it's the preaching of the friars I'm indebted to just there at UVA. They literally kind of broke down my life and broke down, what my true happiness is. And it was kind of one of those things where it's like I had to make a choice. It's like either I pursue like this old way of thinking or I literally drop everything. So a big moment for me would have been my second year in college on Holy Thursday. I remember like the priest at that time, I had made my first confession in 5 years, and then he started being my spiritual director. He was the pastor there, Father Brian, and but he ended up being the celebrant and the homilist for Holy Thursday, and just spoke on just the profound beauty of the priesthood and the Eucharist. And I remember just like crying throughout the whole mass, being like, "There's nothing greater than this."
Oh,
and
wow.
so. And so I just remember, just crying throughout that whole adoration of Holy Thursday and just being like, Lord, if this is what you want, I'll pursue, being a priest, and from there it's like kind of just spun through there. And now it's beautiful. Just now just being a priest. This is my 8th year of priesthood, but I've done campus ministry for most of my priesthood. So before being here at U of L, this is my second year at U of L, and before that, my first assignment as a priest was to New York City, and so my first 2 years was being parochial vicar at the parish where NYU, New York University is.
Okay.
And then after 2 years as a parochial vicar at the parish, I was named the head chaplain at New York University, and I served as a head chaplain for 4 years. But pretty much I was there at NYU, New York City for 6 years before being assigned to U of L.
That's really awesome that you've had these college chaplaincies since your college years, or where that change, that calling, that vocation became evident, that you're able to connect with college students and kind of give back in that way. It's very beautiful.
I know their aches. I know what they're searching for, and just kind of speaking of that, preaching of that. Yeah. I do love preaching to college people, college students, young people. It's just, that's what gives me the most energy, the most life. I think it's just like I know that world. I know what you're going through. So yeah, and I want to bring you to God.
I think you mentioned preaching a number of times, and I think it's kind of will segue into one of the things that we want to talk about. Perhaps from the outside, when we think of the Dominican order now, especially in light of history, obviously one of the great figures is St. Thomas Aquinas. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes in people's minds, he ends up almost overshadowing St. Dominic, right? We kind of, there's the Thomistic philosophy.
Feel that sometimes.
Yeah, the Thomistic philosophy, the theology, all of that. And I'm a huge fan of St. Thomas. I'm not saying anything negative, here as I say it. But we do think of the Dominican order from a very cerebral perspective, the philosophy, the deep theology, being very intellectual, the kind of the brains of the church, so to speak, or one of those orders. And yet it's easy to forget that it is the order of preachers. That is the first and fundamental charism. That's what St. Dominic was about, which entails preaching truth, whether it be in philosophy, theology, or more day-to-day activities. But I've noticed that my wife, my family, and I, over the last few years, we've gone rather more frequently to St. Louis Bertrand. And that is something we have just been so struck with, has been the preaching. It's really remarkable. I mean, I'm a convert. So as Catholics, we don't really go to church based off the preacher. It's about the Mass. And that is as it should be. But we've just been extremely struck with the quality and the power of the preaching among the Dominican order. It's really great.
Yeah, and St. Thomas Aquinas, would have been formed by just what St. Dominic established in terms of just this way of life, this way of just bringing the active life with the contemplative life, and St. Thomas Aquinas, would have just been formed in that, just having the time to pray, but then to preach too. He would have celebrated masses and would have preached himself, not just sitting down and writing the Summa, all day, but he would have also been out there.
We still have some of his sermons floating around.
Exactly. So,
and his teaching was, while we may think of him for his brilliance in philosophy or even in systematic theology, his position as a professor and teacher was commentating on the scriptures, so
Right.
I think we forget that a lot.
It's like John Paul II. As much as he wrote, he still was so active and traveled more than pretty much anyone. So it's like there's that recognition of the active and the contemplative, and where does one flow from the other, right? Being gives way to doing, right? Doing flows from being, and you have to have that healthy relationship between the two. Otherwise, you get way too in your head and not practical lived application. Or you can get so caught up in service and doing this and that you get burnt out, jaded, and you can't give what you don't have, right?
Absolutely.
So there's that.
Or you don't know who you are anymore.
And you don't even know who you are anymore, right? Let alone someone else. So it becomes very important to keep that connection the right way. So.
Absolutely.
Well, Father, speaking of St. Thomas, one of his most common nicknames in the church is the Angelic Doctor.
Yes.
Yeah, which that's a good question right there, is what that actually means and why he got the name.
Absolutely.
But we would love today to talk a little bit about angels, because we're, as Christians, as Catholics, that's certainly very much a part of our faith, that there are angels. And we can read the Bible and hear these stories of angels appearing to people with great messages. But I think on a day-to-day, most of us don't really think a lot about angels or know much about them, even though apparently they're quite important, so maybe we should.
We should, yeah.
Right?
They seem somewhat cerebral.
Yes, or distant. Yeah, well, they are pure intellects, so to be fair.
Right. That's right.
So, first of all, why was St. Thomas called the Angelic Doctor? What does that mean?
Yeah, for a number of reasons. One was, when you look at his writings, and especially just the depth of his Summa Theologiae, it's almost like his thoughts just came from the angels, came from the things of heaven. But also, it's interesting when you look and you actually crack open that Summa Theologiae. He's got a huge section, lots of questions, articles, just on the angels, which is interesting. Now most of what St. Thomas Aquinas writes there on the angels is going to be his speculation too. It's not going to be actual church doctrine. What we got is actual church doctrine on the angels are going to be what's listed in the Catechism. But compared to what's in the Catechism versus what is in St. Thomas Aquinas, it's like just a lot on the angels. Because what St. Thomas Aquinas is doing is he's just merely speculating, like what are the nature of the angels? What are they doing? How do they fit in the hierarchy of things? And just trying to fit it within the system of overall just God's providence, governance, creation, in terms of salvation, especially where the roles. It's just he's just doing a lot of speculative work there.
The speculation, of course, seems to be, grounded in beginning with Revelation, the scriptures, the apostolic tradition, all of that, and then using a graced intellect, for lack of a better phrase, to then sort of build on that, upon it. But we look at the scriptures, and certainly angels are mentioned a lot, but maybe there's not a ton of information given about them. So, I mean, let's just start at the very beginning. What is an angel?
Yeah, well, an angel is a messenger. It's this pure spiritual being. So not corporeal, doesn't have a body. It's different than us. It also has a rational nature. So it has ability to know and ability to choose to love.
So it's not just a little baby with wings and a
no,
heart and an arrow.
It's very
right?
cute. Yeah,
Not
very cute
Cupid.
depiction.
Right?
Yeah. Very cute depiction. No. So we should definitely, those can be great artistically, especially just beautiful artwork of any kind of depiction of angels taking on a body. Knowing that the angels are part of our life, but we should also realize that they're purely spiritual. We can't see them. We don't have the senses really to know them readily. So we know them by faith.
Where does that tradition of the portrayal of angels as infants, is that due to innocence? Is it an attempt to capture innocence? Where does that? Do you know where that comes from?
I don't know where that comes from, but I like that that proposal. Maybe it does come from a state of innocence. I don't know if.
Well, I think that was the innocence of the angels was also part of why Thomas Aquinas is called the angelic doctor too.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember that from the Angelic Warfare Confraternity Catechesis.
Innocence and purity. The childlike spirit.
Right. I feel like I heard nobody quote me on this because I'm.
Oh, we're going to quote you.
Yeah. But I feel like I heard
You are being recorded today.
at some point that it had to do with the adoption of Roman art.
Yeah, that could be.
Kind of in the Renaissance period.
That makes sense, yeah.
As well. Although, I mean, I don't see why it couldn't be both.
Yeah.
And also recognizing angels can appear in all kinds of different ways. Like if you think of Ezekiel's vision of the angels, there's like that YouTube video you can find of how they graphically created what an angel would have looked like based on Ezekiel's vision, and it's utterly terrifying.
Yeah.
Which is actually very humorous at the same time. But if you actually saw something like that burst into your reality, you would be on your face in terror. Like no wonder they had to say, "Be not afraid."
Which seems to be the common reaction of people in the Bible when they encounter angels.
Yeah, but if like an angel appeared and she was all whimsical, like, oh, helping the little kids cross the bridge, I wouldn't be so afraid. Like it would be like, whoa, this is kind of cool, right? It's a different thing. I don't know why they describe them as angels in the Bible. If they saw what Ezekiel saw, I would call them more like monsters, But
yeah, I mean, here's a question, I guess, because I know that there is, when we look at something like the first 3 chapters of Ezekiel and we see the cherubim being described and how terrifying, the 4 faces and the giant wings that cause an earthquake and the
eyes inside of wheels inside of wheels
and the eyes and all this. That can be a little like, whoa, what is that? Why? I remember when I read that, I was like, I'm really glad that like I'm on the same team as those things. I'm trying to be, but like, what does you look at a vision like Ezekiel or Isaiah's vision of the throne room of heaven. How do those, and sorry if I'm just kind of fielding this question at you, but how do those kind of help us understand God better when they seem so otherworldly and strange and horrifying?
I think the answer is right there. They're just so otherworldly. They're not of this world. They're not substantive or corporeal creatures. And so it's like maybe like a little shock to our system. It's like we are meant for something more than this world, and to kind of have these angels just manifest themselves, like through revelation, of just. Yeah, they're just like these spectacular creatures, something we've never encountered before, except maybe, okay, there's like an eyeball there. I recognize an eyeball, or it's like there's a wing maybe, but beyond that, it's like something we've never seen before. And I think it's just a reminder that heaven is something that's going to be spectacular.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Directly relating to this, and I also kind of want to step back just a little bit. When you were first discussing angels as being rational, having a rational nature, and also not being corporeal, so they're immaterial, they're not, do not have bodies like we have. And then you're talking about these wild visions, in Ezekiel. Two things I would kind of like to, maybe we can discuss for a moment here, if this isn't getting too technical. I think that when we think of spiritual beings, we tend to think, because we have to use our imaginations, that's the only imaginations we've got, and we are used to bodily, material things. It seems that we tend to imagine spiritual beings, whether they be angels or ghosts, as something like us, but thin and see-through, And St. Thomas, so in other words, we might think of an angel as having like an angelic body, and then they do thinking. But St. Thomas is going to tell us that to be immaterial is to be an intellect, right? That they are the same thing. I think we might be tempted to imagine that angels are like us. They've got sort of like spiritual bodies and souls, and then they got an intellect. Or that there could be immaterial things that aren't intellects, right? Like you could have I'm making something up, but
like numbers.
And St. Thomas is going to say that by definition, an immaterial reality is an intellect. That's exactly what it is.
Wait. So are numbers angels then?
Well, that's
or
good.
What is the number?
Get really technical about do numbers have ontological reality or not?
What is
the question.
happening?
No. Well,
this is how it's cerebral. Like, what is even going on anymore?
Okay, yeah. Feel free to ignore that, but it's just okay. Numbers are real and they're immaterial. So does that mean they have an intellect by the definition?
Well, it means what you mean by real. Our numbers are descriptors of the relative numerical value of things, or do they have their own actual existence apart from the things which they represent, like angels do?
Yeah. No, we're getting ahead of here.
Maybe we'll back out of the.
Let's back out of the rabbit hole.
My first reaction is like having intellect means you have a certain kind of power, a power to know truth. A number is like an abstract notion or something, but it doesn't possess a power to know, whereas intellect, a being, has a power to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, you're still.
I think that makes sense. Numbers.
Please help, because I'm
it's
lost
like
now.
dreams. Okay, dreams. Joseph was able to interpret dreams. Saint Joseph, the same deal. And dreams have power only in so much as the human being who's capable of interpreting the dream based on the grace of God given to him to do so, right? Otherwise, dreams are just random thought patterns passing through your brain to give you rest and help you to wake up rejuvenated, right? And they're very weird most of the time, and they don't make any sense, and you can't interpret them. I've tried. It's pretty much nonsense, okay? So there have been a few that I feel pretty confident about. Not getting into that rabbit hole. But when it comes to numbers, it'd be the same thing. Like, numbers are only valuable, time is only valuable insofar as there are people to measure it, to experience it, to be affected by it, right? The only reason time exists is because we all die. Without death, time really isn't important. It doesn't matter. So in the same way, like, I feel like numbers aren't as I mean, maybe it's a little bit different, but numbers represent a quantity of something.
Our awareness of that quantity.
Exactly, our awareness
or
of
you
that
said,
quantity.
Father used the word abstraction, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right, but numbers by themselves can't do anything
Right.
on their own.
I
with
see
their
two
power.
things. I abstract the concept of two-ness from that, but that's in my mind. It's not that two exists as its own
Right.
sort of thing.
Angels
fully.
also
what I mean
had
by
free
power
will.
and intellect, a power
Right.
to be able to do that, to kind of make that kind of judgment abstraction, a power
Right.
to
Yeah.
kind of
Numbers don't have free will. Angels do. That
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness is
And I
different.
did not mean to send that down the rabbit hole. The reason
It was me.
Yeah,
It was my
okay,
fault.
yeah, thanks, man. No, it's a great
that's-
topic,
I will
actually.
stop asking questions
But the
because I have
reason-
many, but we're not going to go there.
The reason I brought that up was going back to the vision of Ezekiel. When we have these sort of apocalyptic visions in the scriptures, I often wonder, because of the limitations of human experience and language, did the person who received the vision actually see it precisely as they wrote it down? Or did they see something which was so far beyond our comprehension when they went back to reinterpret it in human language for us? The best they could do is say, well, it's kind of like this. Yeah. And the reason I bring it up is because when you look at those cherubim-like figures, and we think of the angels as pure intellect, well, what are eyes, right? We see things, we gain knowledge of things through our eyes, but our eyes are heavily limited by our field of vision based off where we're located right now. Whereas the angels can have some awareness of what's on the other side of the earth, right? Mm-hmm. They see a lot more than we do. In other words, there's this idea, this all-encompassing gaze through the many eyes. It
makes sense that they have millions of eyes spinning around.
Right. And then wings, like what is especially at that time, what would be the lightest, swiftest form of travel would be like seeing a bird with wings, because we have to labor to move from one place to the other because we're corporeal. But thought can go around the world in an instant, right? And the angels, being pure intellects, they have that lightness to them. They don't have to struggle to travel or take time. They're instantly there. So I was wondering, what do you think of that sort of interpretation of these eyes and the wings of a way of expressing to us in our language and our thoughts the incredible reality of what these beings are that, Ezekiel just couldn't get across any other way?
Yeah, it reminds me of my time when I was chaplain at NYU, and there were a couple of pieces of artwork that were donated to the Catholic Center there, and because there's this artist there that has studied like there's iconography, mm-hmm. and but anyways, he these fantastic icon images of like the angels, and particularly this image of angels with like many eyes and whatever, and the way this is depicted is not your typical looking angel like that we're used to like from Renaissance, but it's like this beast creature thing that has like millions of eyes painted and like almost like a giant butterfly wing. I'm not doing justice to describing the icon, but I find it beautiful that it was done in the icon style, because icons have that way of having a window into heaven,
right? And
just with this icon of like this beast of a creature, of which we're going to call an angel, is this icon, this window, but depicting like the eyes there. Yeah, it's like it is like their intellect. It's their way of it's like this is this knowing being.
Yeah.
You go on.
And it's something I wanted to just mention this because we don't want to risk being too cerebral, but yet recognizing while angels aren't corporeal and are pure spirit, pure intellect in that way, there's this ability that I believe they've been given by God to manifest themselves in ways that aren't just crazy eyes and wings and burning things that terrify.
Some have entertained angels unawares, says St. Paul, right?
Like, so think of Tobias on the way with Raguel, right? Is that his name? And then he manifests himself as Saint Raphael, right? Or not Raguel. Who is it? Is that his name? I can't remember.
It is Raphael, but I can't remember what name he was using in the story.
I can't remember. But regardless, he was a person, right? He had a body, it looked like. I mean, as far as Tobias realized. And then the same vein, like my mom, when she was a little girl, she saw a vision of angels, two angels appearing over her and her sister. She wrote a song about it years later, and ended up getting married on the Feast of the Guardian Angels. Both her and her sister got married to my dad and his brother, which was kind of cool, right? So that being said, it felt fulfilled in those types of things. Like, why did my mom see these angels, if not for her and her sister being protected through some of the tribulations of the 60s and 70s when they grew up, right? But she said they were childlike in appearance, so that they wouldn't be afraid. And it makes sense that an angel would appear to children, like maybe a whimsical woman helping the little kids across the bridge, right? But maybe to Ezekiel, who was fully grown and he was a prophet, maybe, okay, you can handle the intensity and that freak you out, right?
Yeah.
So there's some level of the all incredibly inspiring perspective of God, as well as the closeness and gentleness of God, revealing the truth of who he is in ways that children even can relate to. Right?
Yeah, and just to talk about, like the angels are not, and this is something we have to take away from our own thinking, but the angels do not have, they're not like their own type of body, because that would be wrong way of thinking. You know, like there's, you know, you have angels that are like, you know, innocent and like look like a human. You have angels that look like, you know, beasts and monsters. It's like, it is a wrong way of thinking. Like they're, you know, they're not like us, where they're one type of thing. Aquinas would say, like, you know, he asked a question, you know, like, you know, can angels, you know, take on, you know, a corporeal body? In a sense, how Aquinas answers that question, it's not like they put on like a skin or something, but how Aquinas kind of speculates, it's like all they're doing is just like they're kind of moving matter to kind of help to make manifest to the person who's seeing,
like a tangible hallucination. But that's not, you don't want to say
Yeah, I know,
hallucination
it's
because
also-
it's
yeah,
real, but
yeah,
it's
right,
like
yeah.
they're not incarnate though. They're
not
not
incarnate
They don't
in the
become
body.
human. They don't have that
No.
body soul connection that we would have.
But to mention all those different kind of forms is just to mention, like, you know, they're trying to communicate to us, because again they're messengers, and angel means a messenger, one who is sent. They're communicating to us something of a saving truth, a revealing truth about God, about us. Their ultimate mission, the angels, is to lead us to God, to lead us to Christ. So they're not just kind of appearing to us just for the sake of, oh, you know, I'm here, you know, or spook you, you know. They, you know, it's like, you know, they're here to
Yeah, they're not
bring
ghosts
us, yeah,
on
bring us
the
to God.
level that you think of when you think of like Halloween.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us a little bit about guardian angels? Because that seems to be a little bit of a misunderstood concept. So, who are the guardian angels? Where do we even get that idea from? What do they do? What don't they do? Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah. You might need to help me a little bit here. But I believe that, like, in the scriptures, and I'm blanking on where in the scriptures here, but the like there are angels that are sent to, like, actually, like, protect us, you know, protect us from harm. You know, angels are sent to protect us from especially the fallen angels, the demons, especially, and to bring us into safety, which is going to be our ultimate home in paradise. Kind of having that tradition then that everyone has their own guardian angel, their own kind of protector, and not just like people, but places too have a protector. It's part of the entrustment of the church to kind of name those protectors over certain areas, dioceses, things, objects, you know. But the angels are the guardian angels are sent to guard. Literally, that's why they're called guardian angels.
I think in one of the Gospels, it's in one of the scenes where Jesus talks about letting the little children come to him,
Yes.
or maybe it's about not harming them, where he says that their angels always behold the face of my Father in heaven. So Jesus, at least about one group of the population, namely children, Jesus is fundamentally saying they all have each one of them's got an angel, right? And what I thought was really cool about that passage too is, again, because we tend to think of things in an overly material way, and it's hard, I think, to break that in our imaginations. We may think that there is a disconnect between worshiping God and working. Mm-hmm. You know, how can somebody, like, let's say we ask a saint to pray for us, right? And this is a question which maybe our Protestant brothers and sisters would ask of us. Well, aren't they in heaven worshiping God? And how can they be paying attention to your prayers, right? We assume you can't be doing both things. And I think that that passage gives us a very clear picture of this in the case of the angels, that the angels are there with the children, and they are at the same time constantly beholding the face of the Father, right? So they're doing their act of worship, because it's not like they're a bodily creature that has one set of eyes and can only look straight forward at God the Father and can't pay attention at the kid over there. You know, That's not how that works. But it's beautiful because what's happening there is, as they're doing their work of being a guardian, their very work is still worshiping God. I find that really beautiful.
Maybe this is where the old adage, parents have eyes in the back of their head, came from. And they're called the primary guardian of their children, right? Wow. That's something to think about. Huh.
Yeah. But I think, would it be fair to assume from Christ's statement about all the children having angels, that I would assume that we don't just lose those when we get a little older, and that therefore I think wouldn't it be safe to extrapolate from that everybody has a guardian angel in some sense?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, well, we definitely lose the life of grace through our own sins, especially mortal sin. But God's still looking out for us. I think he's still reaching out to us even when we reject him. So we don't lose the guardian angel, but we might lose grace.
We might stop paying attention to the promptings of that guardian angel. I have a question I think relates directly to this that I think is very interesting. You mentioned fallen angels, demons, right? And so that's something else. When we think of angels, we often think of that other side of the coin of those that fell. And two things that I would kind of like to hear your thoughts on here is the fact that the angels fell once. They didn't get multiple chances like we as humans have so graciously been given by God. And it's a permanent state, right? There's no second chance, no going back. It's also interesting to think that when the angels fell, and I think this is correct Catholic theology, that it's not just about the bad angels, but that it was here that the good angels were confirmed in grace, so that they will not either have a second chance at falling, right, on the other side. Which means that the angels were initially created, great, glorious, pure, but not yet confirmed in grace, right? There was some test that had to happen. Could you speak to that for a little bit? Why did the angels only get one chance for good or for ill? What might that have been? How does that work with purely spiritual creatures?
Yeah, it does seem kind of not fair.
Well, that's why we said that's why I think you set up the nature of the angels being as pure intellect. I mean that's key. It's like they literally had like the intellect, they had the whole vision, the whole plan of God was revealed to them. So there's like they know everything, whereas we don't know everything. It's like we have to we're both body and soul, so we have to learn through like a lot of discursive reasoning of just like we got our five senses, and you still got to grow up from like a little baby to to an adult, and still got to go through like school and things like that, and you still got to make mistakes and things like that. The angels, they got everything. They see everything, and so especially the thing that they saw was Christ and God becoming man, and God having to suffer on a cross for who? For a nature that's lower than the angels. Us human beings who have a body, who make
who don't
make
have the
mistakes.
fuller perspective.
Yeah, who are actual babies, without wings,
Right.
So because they have everything, the pure intellect there, they're still given that choice. So they're not like robots. They're not mechanical robots that are just created at the will of God. You shall now obey me. But they're
Right.
given the freedom too to choose based on everything that they see, what to do with that intellect, what that intellectual knowledge, right? And so you had angels that chose, we're going to go with this plan. You got angels that were like, no, I don't want to go with this plan. Pride. Pride is that what made those angels fall, especially Satan, the leader of the angels, and calling the other angels to follow his ways. And that's literally what happened.
And is this intellectual nature then what makes that either fall or confirmation permanent upon the one single choice?
Yeah, because it's it's permanent, because everything, and then you choose based on that eternal knowledge, that enduring knowledge.
There's no new experience, no new knowledge.
Yeah, there's no repentance. There's no new knowledge. Exactly.
Yeah.
There's no other experience. It's either you're all in or you're all out. It's.
What does Jesus say on the cross? Father, forgives them; they know not what they do. That's in reference to some people that seem to have a pretty fair idea of, at least surely they had to know they were doing something pretty terrible.
Wow.
But even so, they don't have that perfect knowledge.
That's right. That's right.
The angels would have.
Yeah. So if the angels have been involved in something like that, it's like, well, you've made up your decision. It's a permanent thing.
As
There's
scary as having
no going back.
free will is, to have free will cupped with full knowledge would be even more terrifying.
Hello everyone, this episode is sponsored by Holy Angels Academy. Holy Angels is an independent school shining the light on the Catholic and classical tradition. With a focus on virtue and holiness, their mission is clear and simple: to help their students attain the end for which they were created, eternal happiness with God. Check them out at holyangelslouisville.com.
I think the other thing, part of that equation would be that the concept of time seems to apply only to those of us with bodies, because like the Godhead is eternal. Time isn't really even a thing.
That's what eternity is. That what St. Thomas refers to the angels, a weird
time.
image.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a weird time. Yeah.
So it's like, and not that the angels are like eternal in the same way that God is eternal, but they're not. They're also not subject to the. They're not subject to the bounds of time and space in the way that we are. Like the angel Gabriel, was like appeared to the Blessed Mother, and he's still around, and I'm sure from his perspective, it's as if no time has passed at all. That it's all kind of, I don't know. I don't want to go down the whole thinking about that too hard and make my head hurt. But also that like the same demons who tempt us now have been doing this. They've been at this game for so long, and it's like, we're just it's kind of like we're just passing through or something. Yeah. I say all that to be like, in terms of your decision being final. Yeah. It's like, because it's all kind of, it's not time in the way that we think about time.
I think maybe I think what you're trying to say there is that our decisions are often not final because we're going through time, right? So you have that process of learning, changing one's mind, all of this and that. There's a permanency to that semi-eternal state of the angels that it's like, no, once and done. And I think, Father, correct me if I'm wrong on this, because in the Summa, I know St. Thomas talks about the experiences this term av eternity. And I haven't read this for a while, but I believe what he indicates there, and this may be helpful, we cannot call the angels eternal like God, obviously, because they're created. They have a beginning point, and also they're not that fullness of being, that God is. At the same time, our concept of time, at least in that Thomistic and Aristotelian sense, is based upon our progression of a series of events, right? And to distinguish one from the other, there has to be change, right? So as we grow, things change. Our bodies grow, our minds learn new stuff, our bodies start decaying after a while, all of this. So in that sense, the angels don't really change. So that's the side we want to call eternal, except they had a starting point. So that's where it's like kind of eternal, that middle ground
thing. That's where Aquinas speculation comes in. It's like, it's like trying to grasp these two concepts and and it comes up with this term, just eternity, angel eternity. He just kind of makes it up.
Yeah.
So it's a genius. Yeah.
But that would indicate that permanence to whatever the angelic state is. That there's no like progression or change. So like it does seem, I said once done, always done kind of thing.
It's on some level, it's like they are not embodying heaven versus earth, or heaven versus hell, but like by nature of their pure intellect and the full knowledge and ability to reject or embrace the gift of God and his love, eternal love, there's some level of free will being, they will be present, right, in heaven or in hell. Like you will have to deal with the demons in hell if you chose hell, right? Their presence, and yet incapable of communing with any of them because it's more about torture, versus heaven, which would be total communion, total ecstasy, total joy, right? And total knowledge. And so I think of it like, as we go through life, there's this permanency to the angels, but we get a delay. So like C.S. Lewis's book, The Great Divorce, I'm always fascinated by his understanding of heaven and hell, and maybe even a conglomeration of purgatory in there as well. Not that he makes any official doctrinal claims, but it is beautiful, mystifying in many ways, because of that just chasm between heaven and hell. And yet I look at human beings in this life, not so much living in the Great Divorce. A lot of people act like that, like there's no hope, it's always getting worse, we're basically doomed to hell. When in truth, it really comes down to the perspective you have, the attitude you choose, the friends you surround yourself with, and what you're looking for in life, right? And so it's not so much the Great Divorce, it's to me the Great Delay. Right? We as human beings get to, like the angels had to like, all right, you exist, you have full knowledge, choose. We get this long period of time called earthly life, where it's this big delay of God proposing something and just waiting.
But don't take advantage, because we don't know how long that time's going to be.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It doesn't mean like the delay is the same length for everybody, right? Yeah. There is a mystery to it too. But
also, there's a similar... And Father, I've actually been wondering about this, so maybe you can shed some light on it. But there's a bit of a similar, a similarity, I guess is the word I'm looking for, between like the angelic choice that they made, that was kind of a once for all sort of choice, and then also the fact that at death, a human's will is locked in a sense, and so you, like, if you're in heaven, you can't ever leave, and you wouldn't want to leave, right? But also if you're right, confirmed in grace. If you're in hell, you also can't leave, and you also don't want to leave. So yeah, I don't know, does that have to do with that being separated from your body and not having a body anymore, or what is it?
Absolutely. It's like you're passing, you are now joining in kind of where the angels are as kind of pure intellect, and so now you're going to be purely spiritual, when you are separated from your body and death. And so you are now, like you kind of say, you're kind of like now at that point on the same playing field, playing angel field,
Yeah.
it's just as the angels, and so it's kind of like now, we also believe in purgatory as well. So if there's this like desire, this grace desire, for heaven, but you're still, that intellect is still attached to sin, the things of this world, things that aren't attached to God, then it needs to be purified as well. But if there's this kind of just complete, like your intellect and your will are just like, your soul is just completely like detached from God, and especially in desire, it's like, oh shoot,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does that play into the resurrection of the body?
Mm-hmm.
Like at the end of time, the damned souls are still.
Oh man, that's gonna be
Yeah,
crazy.
and
Uh,
so
Jesus
the-
refers to it. It's
Yeah.
the second death. It's this.
Yeah.
Cast in the
It's
lake
the
of fire.
resurrection of condemnation, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
my mom described it as like heaven's obviously a place of ecstasy, but hell would be like. Could you imagine being stuck in your decaying corpse in a coffin for all eternity, and you're fully aware, but yet you want to be there as well? Like and the pain, the suffering.
Yeah, not that you want it because you
couldn't,
enjoy it, but because
Right.
due to lack of charity. And I think this is such a critical point. We so often think, and I think particularly people maybe who aren't Christians have this very incorrect idea of Christianity being a list of do's and don'ts, and then based on how you did, God either sends you to hell or sends you to heaven. And then you get
Sounds
all
like a
these,
mean
and then
Santa
all you get
Claus.
these kind of like snarky, comedian types, right? Like Mark Twain, everybody, and they're like, well, the company in hell sounds a lot more interesting. As if that would be more enjoyable because you'd be hanging out with people like you. That is so far off the point. The point is that hell is really a choice that the individual makes, and it is rooted fundamentally in denying love, in denying charity. And so while the person that experiences hell doesn't want to be there from the sense of, I'm enjoying the torture, right? Nobody's going to be enjoying that. There's also the sense, to your point, John, that they do want to be there because to not be there means opening up, means loving, means caring, right? And so we have this, and we see it in this life. If we go through moments of perhaps extreme selfishness, maybe we're living in a really bad way, and I'm speaking from personal experience, right? Been here. Your life tends to get harder and more miserable, but sometimes the thought of breaking out of that, of actually loving somebody else, getting outside of yourself, seems almost harder. And so you let yourself just keep stewing in your miserable little cocoon.
Oh,
And I think that's a bit like hell. It's a choice that's made. It's not like anybody's going to enjoy hell, but it's also going back to the Great Divorce. That's one of the brilliant parts of that story, is that people were freely given this bus ride from heaven to hell, and from hell to heaven rather.
Yeah.
And they were like, it demands too much of us. We're going back.
we don't want this, right?
Right.
It's very sad.
Father, can I ask a question? The one I asked earlier about angels and demons, kind of wanted to follow up on that. You talked about the angels having some knowledge, perhaps based on their rank, maybe different levels of it, who knows, of the incarnation, God's gifts to mankind, these lesser creatures. And so this fall is a fall of pride. Right? And I think there's been a little debate over pride versus envy, with most theologians coming down on the side of pride. But it is interesting that Thomas, since we're using him as our foundation here, says it's got to be one or the other, because those are the two spiritual sins. Obviously the angels not having bodies, they can't have fallen through lust or greed or, any of these other things. So it's got to be pride or envy. Because it's interesting to think, how could angels in the presence of God with all this knowledge, and nobody around to tempt them, right? Like we've got tempters, now that there are fallen angels, there's things that tempt us.
Yeah.
But prior to any temptation, and there was no like evil, bad things for them to want, there is that question of, well, how could they have even sinned? Thomas says, pride or envy. But I've had a thought for actually 2 or 3 years now. I'd love to run this by you and see what you think. I started noticing in the New Testament that there's a very interesting connection made, sort of a parallel, an opposing parallel between Peter and Judas. They're on opposite ends, but there's also a certain parallel between them. So when Jesus gives the bread of life discourse, right, it's Peter at the end who is contrast with Judas. Peter's like, you got the words of life. Well, I'll keep sticking with you. And then John immediately is like, Jesus knew who would betray him, and he indicates it's Judas, right? And then we get to the Last Supper, right before that actual moment's going to happen. And we have the washing of the feet and the arguing about who's the greatest. And we have, again, Peter, who's like, oh, no, Lord, you shouldn't do this, because he can't imagine his master humbling himself, right? The great Messiah shouldn't be washing my feet. But once he hears it's necessary, he's like, okay, go ahead and wash all of me. But it's right after this, the devil enters into Judas, right? And so when Jesus gives the bread of life discourse, there's obviously this act of, it's very incarnational and it's tremendous humility, that he's actually going to feed people with himself. He's going to give himself to us as bread to frequently be abused. I mean, how often do we receive him unworthily, And then here he is washing the feet of the disciples. And we hear a lot in the New Testament about demonic possession. Jesus is always freeing people from that, and they're always demons. It's the only time, I believe, in all the scriptures that we hear of the devil entering someone. It is very specific. And I was really struck by that, because there seems to be this connection between the devil, not just any devil, but the devil, Satan, and Judas. And then he goes out from the upper room, which sounds to me like being cast out into the outer darkness. And so I wondered if what we get here in the upper room is a glimpse of what triggered the pride and the fall of the devil. And it goes back to our conversation on guardian angels. If it was a twofold thing, first of all, how on earth can God humble himself to become incarnate for people? That doesn't seem right, says the devil. And then secondly, do we ever think if that God gives us all guardian angels, what does that mean? If somebody gives you the job to guard something, you're kind of the servant of that thing. You got to stand there and watch it, right? And the angels have to look at us as being beings or creatures of a lesser nature than they are. So Jesus is doing these things like washing people's feet, becoming a servant, becoming a slave. And then I just can somehow imagine in heaven some of the angels saying, really? I'm like the greatest of the archangels, or I'm the covering cherub, and I got to watch over that thing? And then you're going to become one of them? No. I don't know. It's speculative, I know, but it just has struck me that maybe we're getting a picture in all of that of how that fall initially happened.
Sounds like a great. Give me some ideas for my next Holy Thursday homily. There, that's great. That's awesome.
But it's like, if you wonder what would trigger an angel to sin, like what would be the cause of that temptation, it seems that it must be something to do with this humility.
Oh, right? Absolutely, and that's why it is pride, and pride is that possession of like that intellect. Going back to the intellect, it's like that intellectual knowledge. What are you doing with that intellectual knowledge that you have, right? And choosing then, to either be a servant of it or to become to become like God, that is the downfall of the angels. I also love like how you took that contrast between St. Peter and Judas, and it's almost like, when you read through the progression of St. Peter and his relationship with Christ, even though he continues to sin and make mistakes, he's sharing more and more in Jesus's mission, almost like his mission of the incarnation, of growing in humility to serve the church in that way, whereas Judas is growing more and more in the opposite of the incarnation, of that pride, that mastery over God, when actually he's in reality he's not like a king, he's not a prince, he's like this mere man, of low status, yet he tries to be something he's not. I think the fallen angels are trying, or they're seeking to be something that they're not.
Isn't that how the devil tempted Eve with that idea that you could be like gods, or be like God?
Yep, exactly.
And I think it's interesting too, because we see Peter at the head of the list and Judas at the bottom of the list, right? And so we see there's this huge difference between them. But I think, they're both humans. I think there's in some ways certain similarities, except that it is the humbling of Peter that is ultimately a salvation, because at the very end, they both betray Jesus, right?
Yes.
They're not that wildly different in one sense, except one of them repents. He weeps bitterly, and the other one can't handle it even enough to repent, even though he knows he's done wrong. He's aware of it intellectually, but hangs himself. It's the suicide. It's the I can't do I can't even accept forgiveness, right? That would break me too much to accept forgiveness.
Yep, absolutely.
It's very sad.
It's very tragic. Vince, you had mentioned something in some of our group texts prior to this today. I don't know if you wanted to get into it. I can kind of lead it, but kind of prompt the question. But we've been talking a lot about the awesomeness of angels, these tremendous creatures and everything.
They are pretty epic.
And how higher, at least in their original created state, how much higher they are than our nature. Yeah. And then how God has given these great opportunities to humans. And I think where we're going here with this too is something that some of the saints and theologians have speculated may also have been part of the devil's fall, is the tremendous honor that is given to this humble 14-year-old girl from Nazareth a couple thousand years ago, who ends up becoming higher than all the angels, the Queen of the Angels, the Blessed Virgin. And that remarkable scene of the Annunciation, where Gabriel comes to her, unlike any other case of human interaction with angels, almost with an act of humility. Right? The way he addresses her is unheard of in human-angel interaction. What were your thoughts on that, Vince? I know you said you were very struck by the comparison between the mighty angels and then this simple woman, simple seemingly, who is in reality greater than them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said a lot of it, but yeah, it was that. Well, so all this was prompted by a couple of weekends ago. My wife and I just sort of decided to read the book of Daniel kind of randomly. And there's some weird visions and stuff in Daniel. And then that reminded me of Ezekiel. So then we read the first 3 chapters of Ezekiel as well, which was kind of what our whole first part of this discussion kind of was covering about just like these, ginormous, terrifying, mighty angels, right? And then the fact that Mary is the Queen of Angels, that this humble woman is higher than all of them, is, I guess more favorable in the sight of God, is greater. She is greater. And that's just so striking, humbling. Yeah, I don't know, just something you could just sit with, I guess.
Well, I think it changes our perspective about our own selves as human beings. I mean, Mother Mary was a human being, and she was given a fullness of grace that no other human being would ever be given or could ever be given. I mean, she was filled to the capacity on a level that only she could receive, and yet she received the greatest possible capacity any human creature could ever receive of grace. And I think that's what gives her that title, Queen of Angels, right? But yet at the same time, we're called to imitate her, right? We're called to follow her example because she was the first disciple of Christ. In fact, the Marian ministry precedes the Petrine ministry, right? Yeah. So it's like the Marian dimension of the church has to precede the Petrine dimension, the papacy of sorts, right? So there's that posture of receptivity before you can then take initiative and lead the church into the future. And I think that's part of it. Mother Mary is that example, and somehow the angels support that, right?
Yeah.
So.
Here's a cool contrast. I mean, just speaking of the Annunciation and Mary and the angels, I mean, Mary, she has just complete trust. Like, she has complete faith in God's plan, and she just says fiat. She just says yes to this plan. It's like, okay, it's like she's given like maybe like a brief description of like what's going to happen. Okay, like you're going to conceive, okay, and then it's like here's God, your name is Jesus. That's basically it, and it's like whereas the angels, like Gabriel's like knows everything, and I think Mary's yes is to something she doesn't know everything exactly, and until she like sees it all play out, and she continues to say yes, to giving birth to Jesus, to seeing Jesus grow up, and then seeing Jesus do his ministry, and then being mocked, and then seeing Jesus like die and suffer on the cross, and having that complete trust through the whole plan. I think that's just tremendous humility. Like, I think that's why she's the queen of the angels. She has this tremendous love and trust.
And precisely the opposite of of the devil's response.
Exactly.
It's the opposite of the devil's response. And what just occurred to me in your saying that was that think about the contrast between her yes and the yes of even the mightiest of the angels. Mm-hmm. Because we already said the angels had all the knowledge there. This is what's up. Choose. Mary was given very little information comparatively, and still said yes.
And
it's
not only
blessed
that,
are those
so
who
her
have not
active
seen and
trust
yet
was
believe.
greater.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and not only that, she immediately goes in haste, as we reflected at World Youth Day for a week last month, and goes to serve her neighbor. And serve her neighbor who had conceived the last Old Testament prophet, but compared to what she just received, was still technically, quote, inferior to her. So she was not concerned about herself. Like, why should I have to take care of this girl? Like, I know she's my cousin, but she's giving birth to some guy who's not as important as this guy.
I got God.
Womb, right? I got God in my womb. Like, what are you doing? Like, that's
Plus,
not...
travel was dangerous in those days and all that. She's taking a risk. She could have loads of excuses to have stayed home.
But how absurd of an attitude would that have been?
Yeah.
And yet that is the same attitude that all the angels that ended up becoming angels of darkness to follow Satan were saying when they said, I will not serve.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when I was a youth ministry, we did the Saints Alive production, little theatrical skits, and we did one on the 100th anniversary of Fatima, because it was that year that we did this, and so we literally had Fatima, and somehow we had JP2 and Pope Leo the 13th and the St. Michael Prayer, and somehow all these people, and Sister Lucia was like a narrator of the play, and we also had a battle scene between St. Michael the Archangel and Satan. So we had different, my brother played the part of Satan, not Matt, I love you, but if he ever hears this one.
You weren't typecasting him for the
no,
part.
not at all, not at all, truly. He was just standing in because I didn't have another kid who was willing to do it, right? So thank you, Matt. But then another kid was the St. Michael, and it was just this battle of, St. Michael calling him to something higher, and Satan says, I will not serve. And they had, swords fighting, and I think we even had Margaret Sanger as a character in this play. It was pretty intense. Wow. It was, my dad recorded it. But anyway, I just think of this as that epic battle scene in Revelation, right? Yeah. Where Satan is cast out into the outer darkness, and we can practically experience that with those of us who fall into sin, into darkness, and through that choice of rejecting love and relationships and God's design for us, we are also cast into the outer darkness, not because of anything God did, but because of the very nature that and the way he made us. We're rejecting the very design of our bodies, of our souls, of our humanity. So we cast ourselves out, right? This is why Jacob had to flee the promised land, because he screwed his brother over by stealing his birthright and his blessing. So he had to go into exile. It's the same thing. We all do that to ourselves. It's kind of sad.
Yeah.
I think couple of things that are popped into my head are, one of the things about this remarkable contrast of Mary with the angels is I think it is a tremendous lesson of what it is in which true greatness lies. And we had, I believe it was the readings yesterday, Sunday Mass. My ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts, says the Lord, right? This gives a little bit of a picture into that. When we imagine like that battle, as you're describing it, John, when we think of this in human terms, what is greatness? What is might? What is power? It's the stronger guy, the guy with the bigger sword, all of that, the guy with more on his side. And yet in God's economy, it's very, very different. And true greatness was the humility of Mary. The true greatness was the faith of Mary, as you're pointing out, Father, the trust of Mary. This is so important because if pride is the original sin and humility is the antidote to it, look, all of us are prone to pride. This is the great temptation. And God doesn't have the response to the devil's fall be, the super awesome miracle working prophet saint that's going to be okay. And you're great. I'm going to make you like king of the angels now. He goes the opposite direction. The greatest humility, the greatest simplicity, a person who even in their society as a young woman would have been considered virtually nothing at the time, right? This is how God sort of undoes that which the devil did and shows us what true greatness is. Mm-hmm. Not in power, not in might, not in high positions. The other thought I had too is, we were talking a moment ago about Judas and the devil. One thing I wanted to mention is, we're very aware of what Judas did, but Judas is actually mentioned very few times in the New Testament. And I think it is very interesting to notice the times that he is mentioned. As far as I know, with the exception of the actual betrayal and the hanging afterwards, it is only mentioned in connection with Christ's body. The moment when he speaks out against Jesus' feet being anointed, he's not okay with that. Seems to have a problem with the foot washing, because it's right after this that the devil enters into him. And he has a major problem with the bread of life discourse of eat my body. Just want to point that out. I think those are about the only 3 times Judas is mentioned. Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Doesn't like the incarnation.
No, I love that. As you're just talking about the first thought about just going back to the Annunciation there, and just maybe think of like Gabriel for the Hebrew, it's like, because like Saint Michael, like think of the archangel. Saint Michael means one who's like God. Well, Gabriel means strength of God. And I wonder if it's literally the strength of God to announce the incarnation. Like that is the strength, that is the power. The strength of God is to announce the incarnation. It's the incarnation that has power, I think that's fantastic.
And this whole idea of these things showing us what true greatness is about is no doubt the devil wanted his own strength when he fell. And Gabriel, who is one of the greatest of the remaining archangels, he is willing to humble himself before this woman to do the will of God. He has accepted it. And so it kind of also shows that's his strength too, right? This is what made Gabriel's this is the kind of thing that made him confirmed in grace. This is what kept him from falling, was his willingness to do that. That kind of shows his true strength. I cannot help but think of de Montfort right now, because in true devotion to Mary, and like with everything with de Montfort, you got to read all of him and make sure that, you don't take something out of context and theologically abuse it, because he, his flowery language runs that risk occasionally, but he's fantastic. I love Montfort. He's very careful to say, in a sense, and explain why he means this. But he says, in a sense, the devil is almost more afraid of Mary than of God himself. And he goes on to say, because it is more humiliating for the devil to be crushed under the heel of a simple woman, than directly by God. He looks at her as being a woman and therefore weak. He sees her as being a human and therefore below him, right? So it's more humiliating to him to be defeated by a woman. Yes. I think that ties directly into this whole story.
Exactly.
Well, the strength of God, Father, that you're speaking of to me speaks of like the virtue and gift of fortitude, right? Mm-hmm. Like this this strength and courage to walk the right path. And Mary, of course, is choosing to say yes, but she's saying yes to the right thing, right? We can say yes to all kinds of wrong things, but so that strength of God to me is like, against all odds, when Israel seemed at least to at least have hope and to have the most kind of corruption they could possibly have, God did the unthinkable, the impossible. He fulfilled his promise that they'd been hoping for all those centuries, right? And I think of how that applies to all of us in our own practical lives, right? Young people searching, hoping, longing for something better than maybe the abuse they experienced in their family or the lack of faith that they received in their parish or whatever it might be, right? And many young people after confirmation never get any formation at all, any faith development in any capacity beyond maybe the occasional youth conference, retreat, or mission trip that they had a great Jesus high on, but nothing went further than that. And this is where I think college time is so important. So could you speak maybe to the reality or the relationship between the guardian angels and the concept of discipleship? You know, because when I tried to do this, but I didn't get as many young adults because our parishes, you just don't see them, right? I mean, I had even created this name for small group discipleship called the Guardian Angel Principal, because my grandma was the principal at Guardian Angels. So it's kind of like a shout out to her when she passed away. Yeah. But it was just this idea of every young person needs someone to watch over them, to listen to them, to hear them, to walk with them, to disciple them. And I didn't know what your thoughts might be on that connection between every person, including our own parents, having guardian angels, and the importance of discipleship, especially with your work on a college campus. Like, how does, what are some of the practical things you're doing to reach out to young people when they're searching on that level?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was just speaking about guardian angels, and I was just thinking of that title of Mary as Queen of the Angels, and thinking of Mary as she's like the military commander for the guardian angels. Like, if we're talking about Mary's strength and her fiat, she's like the one keeping in check that the guardian angels are having that strength of humility to go and serve us. I think that's beautiful. In terms of discipleship on college campuses, yeah, you need the strength of others to help lift you. I think oftentimes for young people, it's you know, I can do it on my own. I can get by on my own. I don't need any help. I don't need my parents. Sometimes, and when it comes to friends, oftentimes it's more like a friendship of utility or a friendship of pleasure. You know, it's like, what can I get out of you? Whereas it does take humility. It takes all the virtues. It takes fortitude to recognize that, no, I actually need a true friend, a friend that will help me to love, to help me to grow. And that's where I think like the mission of like something like where I'm doing, like being a chaplain of a campus ministry here at U of L. I always emphasize the community aspect. And it goes back to just being a Dominican friar, and St. Thomas Aquinas being a Dominican friar. We were found, you know, the nature of our Dominican life is living community, and I'm blessed to live in a community of 8 total Dominican friars here in Louisville, and having that support, that strength from my fellow brother Dominicans here in Louisville, and also in the province and the order of just all of us Dominicans. And I think when college students find that support in each other and that vulnerability, then that's what's very attractive. I was just yesterday with kind of my student leadership team and my lay campus minister Laura. We were just having kind of our monthly core student leadership team kind of meeting gathering, and we tend to make that a little bit more spiritual for them, rather than we go through the practicals on a weekly basis, but more kind of spiritual strengthening. And we were kind of reading like Pope Paul VI in one of his letters, one of his writings on like evangelization and discipleship, essentially. And he mentions there in a line something like it's the church, or the community, that that others come to admire and seek conversion, or something like that, something along those lines. And I think it's like knowing that the angels and our guardian angels, we're part of this community of the community of the saints, the community of the saints and the angels. Then it's something to admire, to behold, in adoration. Our Lord, our God, and it seeks further conversion for us. To I really should pray to my guardian angel. I really should ask for help, in circumstances.
And adoration, I think, for young people, especially in college, would evoke this deeper appreciation for the bread of angels, right?
Ooh,
That's
yeah,
what it
it's
is,
game
after
changer,
all,
yeah.
right? And you think of it as a child, like you're taught the guardian angel prayer. This is part of our infancy. I mean, get on your knees in front of your bed, fold your hands like this, and say the guardian angel prayer. And you say, God bless mommy, God bless daddy, God bless my brother or sister or aunt or uncle. And it's an intentional, lesson to learn how to pray, including not just the words, but the posture. And how many of us have gotten out of the habit of getting on our knees in front of our bed with our hands folded like this and saying that guardian angel prayer? And I know that sounds juvenile, but why does it sound juvenile if not for this unholy spirit that has conditioned people to say in their own hearts and minds, I will not serve. This is my body.
Or I won't be like a child.
Or I won't be like a child. I want to be mature and think for myself in the unholy way, right? And that can lead us in the wrong direction. So, I mean, maybe you could add something to your Lenten homily again, Father, and encourage the young college students you're working with to pray on their knees and say the guardian angel prayer with their hands folded.
That'd be awesome.
Teach them to do that again, and maybe give some example after Mass and do it together. I don't know.
Absolutely.
We definitely all need that reminder to be more childlike. I mean, even our Lord said, unless you become like one of these little ones, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So,
right. That's exactly.
Maybe there's a good argument right there for adults having guardian angels. Maybe it's not just children, but the childlike.
Children.
We're supposed to be,
That's it.
Well, the way I like to think of it is even with St. Thomas Aquinas, as much of an intellectual giant as he was, I think he was childlike in his intellect in terms of seeking truth from the position of a child. Him going to the chapel and laying his head against the tabernacle and asking the Lord to bless him with this knowledge. That's meant for us, and meant for our salvation. And I think it's just that's just a remedy to pride. Is knowledge, true knowledge doesn't come from our doing. It truly is a gift, from God.
And furthermore, well, Isaac, you're the only experienced parent here.
You're soon to be.
I will. Lots of experience coming up.
Experience does not mean expert. Let me.
No, but you know a thing or two. Give yourself some credit. But connecting that that childlike spirit to Mary's fiat, the not knowing everything and still trusting that your parent, whether that's your earthly parent or your heavenly Father, knows what's best, and maybe without fully understanding, still, just saying yes. I don't know if you have any personal, if that strikes any kind of a chord with you, or.
Yeah, I think it does. I think for one thing, I was thinking of the verse as well, where Jesus says, "Unless you become like little children." I think that this goes back to the whole notion of the original sin. It goes back to the Garden of Eden. It goes back to the fall of the angels. It really always comes down to pride. We don't like to humble ourselves as people. It's really difficult to do. And one of the really beautiful things that I see with children, and I've got 8 of them, so I get to see a lot of interactions, right? The children aren't innocent. I mean, people talk about the innocence of children. There's an innocence in a sense, but there's human nature there, right? And it comes out pretty quickly. It doesn't take long before even, I'm sure I'm prejudiced, but I think all my kids are pretty great. But undoubtedly, you see plenty of human nature that is not always perfect, shall we say. But here's one of the things that I think is really, really beautiful. As an adult, when we offend one another, it typically takes us a very long time to move past that. Even if we're willing to say things like, I'm sorry and I forgive you, the relationship has been ruptured and damaged, right? It takes a very long time before we're willing to enter back into community or communion with some other person. And now sometimes we need to not do that if the person is truly unhealthy for us. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about as a matter of this pride versus humility thing. It's very hard for us to, get through these difficult situations. And one of the things I find beautiful, but also amusing about children, something will happen that will occasion a fight between a couple of my younger children. And, oh my goodness, you would really think World War II had started again. It's like each one of them must be the most horrible person on the planet right now because of what they just did.
Dude, I remember those fights with my brother.
And you intervene and, might have to do some correcting or disciplinary action. And then you insist the one says, I'm sorry, do all that. And of course, initially it's I'm sorry, won't look at the other person grumpy. It is amazing to me how 5 minutes later, they're sitting side by side, playing and talking and laughing at each other as if nothing ever happened. The ability to move quickly past that is one of the beauties to me of that childlike spirit, is it doesn't hold grudges. We get older, we get kind of hardened unless the Holy Spirit is there to soften us. You did what to me, you said what to me, 10 years later, I'm still not talking to you.
I know.
That's how we are as adults. And the reality is, for me, I, throughout my life as an adult, have complained to God. Why are things so difficult? Why did you let this happen to me? Are you out to get me? Are you mad at me? Right? I get these kind of attitudes towards God. And then on the other side, God's gotten you through it all, and it wasn't a big deal, It seemed to us like the end of the world at the time. And then I watched my children fight. And it's the end of the world to them right now. And they are fighting over something no bigger than a marble, right? Or a pencil. And very early on as a parent, it began to occur to me, I wonder if this is exactly how God views us. Because I'm convinced as an adult, I know what's serious. This is a matter of my job. This is a matter of a relationship. This is my health, my time. I'm exhausted. This is a big deal, God. Why aren't you helping me out more? In God's eyes, he's like, no. You're not really grown up yet. That's just a marble. That's just a pencil. Okay, it's a little tiny thing. And that's the beauty then of the childhood thing to me, is that while they think it's a big thing, they also let it go as if it's a small thing immediately once it's over, and they love each other again. So maybe that's some of the childlike spirit that we should take with us. That's my short answer.
Yeah, that's like
That's great.
it reminds me of something that something my spiritual director in the seminary would often just kind of remind me of, but like focusing more on like the splendor, the grandeur of heaven than like your sins, and goes back to just the grandeur, the splendor of the angels, and just there's something just more magnificent awaiting us. And I think that's striving for that over this little marble of a situation I have.
Don't make a mountain out of a molehill.
Yes.
I believe it is G.K. Chesterton, and I know we're about to wrap things up, but I love Chesterton, and he's always seems to have a great line or quote for everything. But he talks about, in one of his books, how humility really helps you appreciate more things. The world becomes larger when you get smaller. I think that's very profound. And I think this goes back to our conversation of heaven and hell, and why we might choose to send ourselves to hell is pride. We've made ourselves so big in our own eyes that we block out heaven. And as we become smaller through humility, the more that then God can say, okay, now there's room for me to start flooding you with these infinite eternal beauties that will never end. And Chesterton talks about this just in regards to nature. You know, it's not the giant, I think he says, that it can appreciate the grandeur of the trees. It's the little person, right? They can look up and see how amazing they are. So maybe it's a great lesson for us to remember that the majesty and greatness of the greatest angels comes in large part due to their willingness to have had humility.
One closing thought for me, and I'm gonna take this to prayer here this evening. But my wife and I went to Mass yesterday evening at Holy Trinity, and Father Sanders' homily was just particularly good. And he quoted Saint Therese, and I will be paraphrasing because I don't speak as beautifully as Saint Therese, and I also don't have the quote in front of me, but she was talking about, she said, basically something to the effect of, the staircase or stairway up to heaven is just too steep and too long for me, and I'm just too small to climb up it. And so there must be a way, there must be another way up, there must be an elevator, she said. And she said, what is that elevator? It's your arms, O Jesus. But in order for you to pick me up and take me to heaven in your arms, I have to become smaller, even smaller, like a child, so that you can just pick me right up and take me.
That is magnificent.
And so it's like, maybe we're talking about these great, powerful angels and all these very strange biblical descriptions of them, and those are perfectly appropriate in one sense, but then maybe there is that other sense of the little naked baby with wings in the Sistine Chapel, that
an hour and a half later, it seems like it makes sense suddenly.
Almost more appropriate in some
I
ways.
think the angels are humble enough to be like, these people on earth, they're painting us like as little chubby babies.
They let us, right?
Yeah. They're like, okay, we'll let this happen. Yeah. It's not true. But
It's not fair, but yeah. Right. Oh my gosh. Father, do you have any final thoughts about this
final thoughts.
deep topic of angels?
Oh, no. The angels, the angels are just God's incredible creatures for us, creatures that we really should be reminded, just to lean on them. God sends them, he creates them for us for a reason, so why waste God's creation in this sense? So.
And if any young adults are watching, is there any website they can go to get involved at U of L Campus Ministry? Shameless plug. I figured that'd be helpful for you.
Shameless plug. Just U of L Catholic. If you got the Instagram, send us there. Just email, DM us. We'll get you some way. But otherwise, come to campus at U of L. We get students from all the different schools as well that come to hang out with us. So we have a lot going on. So I could go on and on about what we're going on, but just check us out. Yeah.
Awesome. Father, thank you so much for being with us today and talking about this. I know that we are getting ready to wrap things up for today, but would you, for us and for the sake of our viewers and audience, be willing to offer a final blessing for us here?
Absolutely. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. God of angels, God of archangels, God of all the heavenly hosts, God of all the saints, we just give you thanks and praise for blessing our time and our conversation on just the beauty and the splendor of your angels. And we ask that, that you continue to send our guardian angels to watch over us, especially as in those times that we just need your help, and and may you especially continue to send your angels to do battle for us against all the principalities and powers of darkness. We ask for Mary especially, the Queen of Angels, to continue to lead us as she leads the angels to watch and guide us. And may Almighty God bless all of you. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Father, thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you all for watching. And we will see you next week with another episode of Spirit Spire. God bless.